Welcome to our deep dive into the book of Isaiah.
Awesome.
We've got selections from chapters 1 to 66,
Oh, yeah.
and we're going to be kind of looking at it through the lens of how it can speak to anyone seeking to deepen their faith,
Right.
strengthen their goodness,
Yeah.
and build stronger connections with others.
It's fascinating how Isaiah blends warnings and prophecies of destruction with these really powerful messages of hope and redemption.
Right.
It's this unique structure that makes it so compelling.
Yeah, it does feel like a journey, right?
Totally.
And that journey starts with a pretty stark look at the state of Israel.
It does.
Isaiah doesn't hold back
No, he doesn't.
in describing their spiritual and moral decay.
He uses this incredibly vivid image of sickness and wounds.
Yeah.
He says the nation is covered from head to toe. There's just no soundness in them. It's like a doctor giving this grim diagnosis,
Yeah.
wounds and bruises and putrefying sores.
Yeah.
That's how deeply sin had affected their society.
It's interesting that he chose those specific words, putrefying sores.
Right. It's not just about individual mistakes. It suggests this deeper corruption,
Yeah.
a societal turning away from God.
Precisely. And if you look closer at Isaiah 1.56, we see that these wounds aren't just physical.
Right.
The text talks about being stricken and smitten by the Lord. It's indicating this spiritual dimension to the imagery.
I see.
It's a powerful metaphor for how sin can affect us on all these different levels.
So it's not just about outward actions, it's about the state of our hearts.
Exactly. And Isaiah's highlighting the disconnect between outward religious practices and true devotion.
Yeah.
There's this powerful line in Isaiah 1.11 where God says, "What are your multiplied sacrifices to me?" He's rejecting those empty rituals, emphasizing that true worship has to come from a sincere heart.
Yeah. It makes you reflect on your own life, right?
Oh, totally.
Are there areas where maybe my outward actions don't quite align with my inner convictions?
Yeah.
I think we've all had those moments where we're kind of going through the motions but not really connecting with our faith. It's a challenge we all face. And Isaiah is kind of inviting us to examine those areas where we might be falling short. But the good thing is that he doesn't leave us in a place of guilt or condemnation.
Right.
He always points us towards a path of repentance and renewal.
That's encouraging.
Yeah.
So even though Isaiah starts with this pretty bleak picture of Israel's sin,
He does.
he doesn't leave us there.
No.
He offers a way back to wholeness.
Absolutely. And that's a central theme we'll see throughout the book. But before we get to that,
Okay.
Isaiah doesn't shy away from outlining the consequences of this spiritual and moral decay. There's a real sense of urgency in his warnings.
There's that famous line, "If you refuse and rebel, you shall be devoured with the sword, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken it."
Yeah.
It's a powerful image. It
Yeah.
definitely gets your attention.
The image of being devoured by the sword isn't just about physical destruction. It's more of a metaphor for the destructive consequences of sin. When we choose to rebel against God's ways, we're essentially choosing a path that leads to our own undoing.
Right. It's like we're setting ourselves up for failure,
Yeah.
almost guaranteeing negative consequences.
Exactly. And Isaiah wants us to understand the gravity of our choices. He's not trying to scare us.
Right.
He's trying to wake us up to the reality that our actions have consequences.
So he's urging us to make wise choices.
Yes.
Choices that lead to life and flourishing, not destruction and despair.
Absolutely. But even amidst these stark warnings, there's a glimmer of hope.
Okay.
Isaiah doesn't leave us in despair. He offers a path to redemption.
That's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Tell me more about this path to redemption. How does Isaiah present it?
He presents it as a return to righteousness, a turning back to God.
Okay.
In Isaiah 1.26, he says, "I will restore your judges as at the first, and your counselors as at the beginning. Afterward, you shall be called the city of righteousness, the faithful city."
That's a powerful image of renewal,
It is.
of starting fresh.
Yeah.
It suggests that even after significant transgressions,
Right.
we can experience a restoration of our relationship with God.
Precisely. And that's what's so beautiful about Isaiah's message, even when he's addressing the severity of sin.
Right.
He always points towards the possibility of forgiveness, healing, and a return to right relationship with God.
It's a message that resonates deeply with the human experience. We all make mistakes.
Yeah.
We all stray from what's right.
We do.
But there's always a path back to wholeness.
There is. And that path begins with acknowledging our need for God's grace and choosing to turn back to him.
Right.
It's a process of repentance and transformation, and Isaiah offers us a roadmap for that journey.
And it's not a journey we have to walk alone, right?
No.
Isaiah goes on to describe this incredible comfort and protection that God offers his people.
Yes.
It's like he's painting this picture of God as a refuge, a
Yes.
safe haven in the midst of life's storms.
In Isaiah 4.5, he talks about God's presence being like a cloud and smoke by day, and the shining of a flaming fire by night. Upon all the glory shall be a defense.
Wow.
This imagery evokes a sense of being surrounded by God's protective presence, no matter what challenges we face.
It's like a visual representation of that feeling of security and peace
Right.
when you know you're in good hands.
Yes.
When you're with someone you trust completely.
Exactly. And he also compares God to a tabernacle for a shadow in the daytime from the heat, and for a place of refuge, and for a covert from storm and from rain.
So it's not just about physical protection. It's
Yeah.
about that deeper sense of emotional and spiritual refuge that God provides in times of turmoil. It makes you wonder, where do you personally find that sense of refuge?
Oh, yeah.
What are those places or practices that bring you that sense of peace and security?
That's a great question. I think for me, it's often in prayer and meditation, those moments of quiet contemplation where I can just connect with God's presence and find stillness amidst all the chaos of life.
It's fascinating how Isaiah uses these vivid metaphors to convey God's comfort and protection. But this comfort and protection isn't unconditional, is it?
It's not.
Isaiah also makes it very clear that God expects his people to uphold justice and righteousness.
You're absolutely right. In fact, Isaiah fiercely condemns injustice and exploitation,
He does.
particularly the mistreatment of the vulnerable.
He really calls out those who prioritize their own gain at the expense of others.
Yes.
Like in Isaiah 5.8, where he talks about people who join house to house, that lay field to field, to there to be no place.
Yeah.
It's a critique of greed.
It is.
And this relentless pursuit of wealth that disregards the needs of others.
And he doesn't hold back when it comes to criticizing corrupt leaders who love gifts and follow after rewards, but fail to judge the fatherless or consider the cause of the widow.
It seems like a pretty direct challenge to those in positions of power.
It is.
Reminding them that true leadership involves using their influence to protect the vulnerable and to uphold justice.
Absolutely. And it's a challenge that extends to all of us.
Right.
Not just those in leadership positions.
Right.
Isaiah is reminding us that true faith isn't just about personal piety.
Yeah.
It's about living out our faith
Right.
in a way that promotes justice and righteousness in the world.
It's about putting our faith into action. Right.
Yes.
But how can we, as listeners, work against injustice in our own communities?
Yeah, it's a good question.
What are some practical steps we can take to embody this call to care for the vulnerable?
That's a question worth pondering.
Yeah.
It starts with awareness, with recognizing the ways in which injustice is happening around us in our own context.
Wait.
From there, we can seek out opportunities to advocate for those who are marginalized, to support organizations working for social justice,
Yeah.
and to make choices in our own lives that align with our values.
So it's a combination of individual actions and collective efforts.
Exactly. And it's a lifelong journey, not a one-time fix.
Yeah.
But even small acts of kindness, compassion, and advocacy can make a difference.
Yeah, it's a powerful reminder that we all have a role to play
We do.
in creating a more just and equitable world.
Yeah.
But before we get too deep into the weeds of social justice,
Okay.
let's talk about Isaiah's own calling and commission.
Yes. Let's talk about it.
Talk about a life-changing experience.
Oh, my goodness.
I mean, the guy finds himself in the presence of God on his throne, surrounded by these mysterious beings called seraphim.
It's one of the most iconic scenes in the whole book, Isaiah chapter 6.
Yeah.
He describes this awe-inspiring vision of God, seated on his throne, surrounded by seraphim, these angelic beings who are proclaiming, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts."
Yeah.
And the entire scene is filled with this sense of awe, majesty, and the sheer power of God's holiness.
I can't even imagine what that must have been like. It's no wonder Isaiah responds with, "Woe is me, for I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For mine eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts." He's clearly struck by this sense of his own unworthiness
He is.
in the presence of a holy God.
It's a profound moment of self-awareness for Isaiah.
Right.
He recognizes his own sinfulness in contrast to God's holiness.
Yeah.
But what's remarkable is how God responds to Isaiah's confession. He doesn't reject him or condemn him. Instead, one of the seraphim takes a burning coal from the altar
Well,
and touches Isaiah's lips, saying, "Lo, this hath touched thy lips, and thine iniquity is taken away, and thy sin purged."
it's a beautiful image of God's grace and mercy at work.
It is, yeah.
Even when we feel unworthy, God's love reaches out to us, offering
Yeah.
cleansing and forgiveness. It's like he's saying, come as you are, and I will make you new.
Absolutely. And this cleansing isn't just about removing guilt or shame.
Maybe.
It's about empowering Isaiah for the task God has called him to. By purging his iniquity, God is preparing him to speak boldly and truthfully,
Right.
even when it's difficult.
And speaking of difficult tasks,
Right.
God gives Isaiah a pretty tough assignment,
He does.
sending him to people who are described as
Oh, yeah.
hearing indeed, but understanding not, and seeing indeed, but perceiving not.
What a challenge.
It's a recipe for frustration,
Yes.
isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like he's being sent on a mission
Right.
that's almost guaranteed to be met with resistance and rejection.
You're right. And God doesn't sugarcoat the reality of Isaiah's mission. He warns him that his message will be met with opposition,
Yeah.
that people will harden their hearts and refuse to listen.
Right.
But even in the face of these challenges,
Yeah.
Isaiah chooses to remain faithful to his calling.
It's a powerful reminder that following God often involves embracing difficult assignments
Yes, it does.
and persevering through opposition.
That's right.
It's not always easy, but it's always worth it.
It is.
But let's not dwell on the difficulties for too long.
Okay.
Isaiah also offers these incredible glimpses of hope for the future,
He does.
particularly in chapters 9 and 11.
Yes. Chapters 9 and 11 are full of these breathtaking prophecies about
Okay.
a coming Messianic King
Okay.
and a world transformed by peace and justice.
Okay, tell me more about this Messianic King. What does Isaiah say about him?
In chapter 9, we encounter this iconic passage that speaks of a child being born, a son being given,
Mm-hmm.
whose name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace.
Wow, those names are so powerful and evocative.
They are.
And they point to this future where justice and righteousness prevail.
They do.
It's beautiful.
And in chapter 11, Isaiah expands on this vision. He's describing a world where the wolf dwells with the lamb, the leopard lies down with the kid,
Right.
and a little child leads them. It's a poetic portrayal of a world transformed by peace and harmony,
Right.
where all creatures live in unity and where the curse of sin is broken.
Yeah, it's a beautiful image that speaks to our deepest longings.
It does.
For a world free from violence and injustice, a world where creation is restored to its original wholeness.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that these prophecies aren't just about a distant future.
Okay.
They also offer hope for the present. They remind us that God is working in the world, even when we can't see it,
Right.
and that his ultimate plan is one of redemption and restoration.
So even when things seem dark and hopeless,
Right.
we can hold on to this vision of a future where God's love and justice reign supreme. It's a hope that can sustain us through those difficult times
So can.
and inspire us to work for a better world,
Yes.
even when it seems impossible.
Absolutely. And that hope isn't passive. Isaiah also challenges us to actively participate in bringing about this future,
Right.
to live in a way that reflects God's justice and righteousness in the world.
That's a great point. It's not enough to just sit back and wait for God to do everything.
No.
We're called to be active participants in his plan of redemption and of restoration.
You're right, and we see that call to action, particularly in chapters like 10 and 12, where he speaks of the remnant, a faithful group of people who will return to God and rebuild what has been broken.
This idea of the remnant is so powerful.
It is.
It's the idea that even when the majority is turned away from God,
Right.
there's always a faithful few who remain true to him,
Yeah.
and through them, God's purposes will be accomplished.
Exactly. And Isaiah encourages this remnant to place their trust in God alone, not in human strength or alliances. In chapter 12, he declares, "Behold, God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid. For the Lord Jehovah is my strength and my song. He also is become my salvation."
Like a powerful statement of faith.
It is.
A declaration that even when everything around us seems to be crumbling, we can find our security and hope in God alone.
Yes.
But this trust isn't just about feeling safe and secure, is it?
No, it's not.
It's about living a life of courage and conviction,
It is.
a life that reflects God's justice and righteousness in the world.
You got it. It's about putting our faith into action,
Right?
being the hands and feet of God in a world that desperately needs his love and grace.
So we're all called to be part of this remnant,
We are.
to live in a way that reflects God's heart for justice, mercy, and peace.
Right.
It's a challenge,
It is.
but it's also an incredible privilege, isn't it?
It is.
To be part of something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah.
To be used by God to bring hope and healing to a broken world.
It's an honor to be called by God.
Yeah.
And to be entrusted with such a mission. Before we dive into the next section of Isaiah,
Okay.
let's just take a moment to appreciate the sheer beauty and power of Isaiah's language.
I know. I find myself underlining passages constantly.
Yeah.
This book is just filled with these vivid metaphors.
It is.
Striking images and powerful declarations that just jump off the page.
He was a master storyteller.
He was.
Or a
And
poet.
he had a way of capturing the complexities of human experience.
Dude.
The depths of God's love and justice.
Mm-hmm.
And this hope for a better future in a way that just transcends time and culture.
And his words have inspired and challenged people for centuries.
They have. But beyond the beauty of the language,
Yeah,
Isaiah's message is deeply challenging, isn't it?
it is.
He doesn't shy away from confronting our complacency, our self-righteousness,
He doesn't.
and our tendency to turn away from God's ways.
Absolutely. He calls us to a higher standard, to a life of integrity, compassion, and justice. And that can be uncomfortable,
Yep.
especially when we see how far short we fall of that ideal.
Yeah.
But it's a necessary challenge.
It's a call to wake up from our spiritual slumber,
It is.
to examine our lives in light of God's truth,
Yeah,
and to make choices that align with His will.
right.
It's a call to become the people God created us to be,
Yes.
people who reflect His love and righteousness in a world that desperately needs His presence.
Absolutely.
Are you ready to dive into the next section of our deep dive?
Let's do it. There's so much more to uncover in this rich and complex book.
Perfect. We'll pick up right where we left off after a short break. See you in a minute.
Welcome back. We're picking up our exploration of Isaiah with
Okay.
a look at one of the most striking metaphors in the book.
Okay.
God's lament over his vineyard in chapter 5.
Oh, yes, the vineyard. It starts so beautifully,
Yeah.
almost like a love song.
It does.
God describes planting this vineyard on a fertile hillside,
Right.
building a watchtower,
Mm-hmm.
clearing the stones.
Mhm.
You can really feel the care and tenderness
Yeah.
He poured into it.
It's a powerful image of God's love for his people.
It is.
He's invested everything in this vineyard,
Right.
expecting to produce good fruit, justice, righteousness, faithfulness.
Right. But what does he find?
Wild grapes.
He finds oppression and a cry.
Yeah.
The very opposite of what he intended.
It's heartbreaking.
It is. It's like a parent watching their child
Yes.
make self-destructive choices.
Absolutely.
You can almost feel God's disappointment in his words.
It's a deeply moving passage. And it highlights this crucial point. God's blessings aren't meant to be hoarded
Oh,
or
right.
misused. They're given to us so we can be a blessing to others,
Right.
to reflect his character in the world.
So it's not just about receiving God's love and grace.
Right.
It's about sharing it with others,
Yes.
letting it flow through us
Yes.
to bring healing and wholeness to the world around us.
Exactly. And when we fail to do that,
Yeah.
when we turn away from God's purposes and embrace injustice and wickedness,
Yeah,
there are consequences.
there are.
God doesn't just sit back and watch passively.
Right.
He takes action.
He decides to remove the protective hedge and break down the wall around the vineyard,
Right.
leaving it vulnerable
Yes.
to being trampled and devoured.
Yeah.
It's a powerful image of God allowing the natural consequences of sin to take their course.
It is. And it's a reminder that we can't expect God to shield us from the repercussions of our actions
Right.
if we're actively choosing to rebel against him.
This raises a really interesting question. How do we reconcile this image of God's judgment with his love and mercy? It seems like a contradiction.
It's a question that has challenged theologians for centuries.
It has.
But I think it's important to remember that God's judgment isn't arbitrary
Okay.
or vindictive.
Right.
It's a direct result of our own choices.
But God isn't punishing us out of anger.
No.
He's allowing us to experience the natural consequences of our actions.
Exactly. He respects our free will,
Right.
our ability to choose.
Right.
But he also holds us accountable for those choices.
Yeah.
And sometimes that accountability involves experiencing the painful consequences of our actions.
It's a reminder that we can't separate God's love from his justice.
Right.
They're two sides of the same coin.
Precisely. And this tension between God's love and his justice,
Yeah.
his desire for his people to flourish, his need to uphold righteousness. This plays out throughout the entire book of Isaiah.
It does.
It's something we see reflected in our own lives as well.
Absolutely.
We all face consequences for our choices, and we all have the opportunity to turn back to God and experience his mercy and grace.
Speaking of experiencing God's mercy and grace,
Yes.
let's transition to Isaiah chapter 6,
Okay.
where we witness Isaiah's own encounter with God
Right.
and his call to prophetic ministry. This is one of the most iconic scenes in the entire book, Isaiah in the presence of God on his throne.
It is.
Surrounded by those mysterious seraphim.
It's a powerful and transformative experience for Isaiah. He finds himself in this incredibly holy space.
Wow.
Overwhelmed by the sheer majesty and power of God.
Yeah.
The seraphim are proclaiming, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts."
Wow.
And the entire scene is filled with this sense of awe and wonder.
It sounds like something out of a movie.
Yeah.
It's no wonder Isaiah responds with, "Woe is me, for I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of people of unclean lips. For mine eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts." He's clearly struck by a sense of his own unworthiness.
Yes.
In the presence of a holy God.
It's a profound moment of self-awareness for Isaiah.
It is.
He recognizes that stark contrast between his own sinfulness
Right.
and God's perfect holiness.
Yeah. But what's remarkable is how God responds to Isaiah's confession.
Right.
He doesn't reject him or condemn him.
He doesn't.
Instead, he offers cleansing and forgiveness.
That's what's so amazing about God's grace.
It is.
It meets us in those moments of brokenness and offers us a way back to wholeness.
Exactly. One of the seraphim takes a burning coal from the altar and touches Isaiah's lips, saying, "Lo, this hath touched thy lips, and thine iniquity is taken away, and thy sin purged."
It's such a vivid image of God's purifying power.
It is.
Doesn't just forgive our sins.
He cleanses us from the inside out, making us new creations. But this cleansing isn't just for Isaiah's personal benefit, is it?
It's not.
It's also about preparing him for the task ahead.
Absolutely.
God is empowering Isaiah for his prophetic ministry.
He is.
By purging his iniquity, God is equipping him to speak boldly and truthfully, even when it's difficult.
And speaking of difficult, Isaiah's commission is far from easy.
Yeah, God sends him to a people who are described as hearing indeed, but understanding not, and seeing indeed, but perceiving not.
Right.
It's a recipe for frustration, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like he's being sent on a mission that's almost guaranteed to be met with resistance.
Exactly. And God doesn't sugarcoat the reality of Isaiah's mission.
He doesn't.
He warns him that his message will be met with opposition, that people will harden their hearts and refuse to listen.
Yeah. But even in the face of these challenges, Isaiah chooses to remain faithful to his calling. It's a powerful reminder that following God often involves embracing difficult assignments and persevering through opposition.
It's not about seeking comfort or popularity.
Right.
It's about being faithful to God's call.
Yeah.
Even when it's hard.
And that faithfulness is often rewarded, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, look at the incredible prophecies Isaiah was given about the future.
Right.
Especially in chapters 9 and 11. Those glimpses of hope for a coming Messianic King and a world transformed by peace and justice are truly inspiring.
Absolutely. Chapters 9 and 11 are brimming with some of the most beautiful and hopeful prophecies in all of Scripture.
I agree.
Yeah.
Let's talk about those prophecies in more detail. What exactly does Isaiah say about this Messianic King?
In chapter 9, we encounter this iconic passage that speaks of a child being born, a son being given, whose name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace.
Wow, those names are so rich with meaning.
They are.
They paint a picture of a ruler who embodies wisdom, strength, compassion, and ultimate peace.
It's a vision that has resonated with people of faith for centuries, offering hope for a future where God's reign is fully realized.
And in chapter 11, Isaiah expands on this vision.
He does.
Describing a world where the wolf also shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the kid, and the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and the little child shall lead them.
Yeah.
It's a poetic and powerful image of a world transformed by peace and harmony.
It is.
Where all creatures live in unity.
Yeah.
And where the curse of sin is broken.
It's a beautiful picture of restoration and reconciliation. It's a glimpse into a future where creation is healed and God's reign of peace prevails.
These prophecies are so powerful and inspiring.
They are.
But they're not just about a distant future, are they?
No, they're not.
They also offer hope for the present.
You're right. They remind us that God is working in the world, even when we can't see it, and that his ultimate plan is one of redemption and restoration.
So even when things seem dark and hopeless,
Yeah.
we can hold on to this vision of a future where God's love and justice reign supreme.
Absolutely. And that hope can sustain us through difficult times and inspire us to work for a better world, even when it seems impossible. But remember, this hope isn't passive.
Right.
Isaiah also challenges us to actively participate in bringing about this future.
He does.
It's not enough to just sit back and wait for God to do everything.
Right. We're called to be his hands and feet in the world.
Yes.
Working for justice, mercy, and peace.
You got it. And we see that call to action, particularly in chapters like 10 and 12, where he speaks of the remnant, a faithful group of people who will return to God and rebuild what has been broken.
This idea of the remnant is so powerful.
It is.
It's the idea that even when the majority has turned away from God, there's always a faithful few who remain true to him.
Yes.
And through them, God's purposes will be accomplished.
Exactly. And Isaiah encourages this remnant to place their trust in God alone, not in human strength or alliances. In chapter 12, he declares, "Behold, God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid, for the Lord Jehovah is my strength and my song. He also has become my salvation."
It's a powerful statement of faith.
It is.
A declaration that even when everything around us seems to be crumbling, we can find our security and hope in God alone.
It's a reminder that our ultimate allegiance is to God, not to any human power or ideology.
So we're all called to be part of this remnant.
Yes, we do.
To live in a way that reflects God's heart for justice, mercy, and peace. It's a challenge, but it's also an incredible privilege.
It is.
To be part of something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah.
To be used by God to bring hope and healing to a broken world.
It's an honor to be called by God.
It is.
And to be entrusted with such a mission. And before we move on to the final section of our deep dive, let's just take a moment to appreciate the sheer beauty and power of Isaiah's language.
Right. Isaiah was a master storyteller.
He was.
And a poet.
And a poet.
His words have a way of getting under your skin and staying with you long after you finish reading.
He had a unique ability to capture the complexities of human experience, the depths of God's love and justice, and the hope for a better future in a way that transcends time and culture.
His words have inspired and challenged people for centuries.
They have.
But beyond the beauty of the language, Isaiah's message is deeply challenging.
It is.
He doesn't shy away from confronting our complacency, our self-righteousness, and our tendency to turn away from God's ways.
He calls us to a higher standard.
He does.
To a life of integrity, compassion, and justice.
Right.
And that can be uncomfortable at times.
It can be. It's a call to wake up from our spiritual slumber.
It is.
To examine our lives in light of God's truth. And to make choices that align with his will.
It's a call to become the people God created us to be. People who reflect his love and righteousness in a world that desperately needs his presence.
Well said. Are you ready to dive into the final section of our exploration of Isaiah? There's still so much to uncover.
I'm ready. Let's do it.
We're back and ready to kind of wrap up our deep dive into Isaiah. I'm really intrigued by this idea of the day of the Lord that pops up throughout the book. It seems to carry a lot of weight and significance.
Right.
Can you shed some light on what this day of the Lord is all about?
It's a great question. It's a recurring theme in Isaiah. It's this idea of reckoning. A day when God intervenes in human history to judge the wicked and to uphold the righteous. It's often portrayed in vivid and sometimes even apocalyptic terms with imagery of darkness, destruction, and upheaval.
Sounds pretty intense. But it's not just about punishment and destruction, is it?
Right. It's not just the end. It's also a beginning.
Okay.
The day of the Lord kind of marks the end of injustice and oppression. But it also ushers in this new era of peace, righteousness, and God's reign on earth. It's a reminder that God is ultimately in control. He sees the suffering, the injustice in the world, and he will set things right.
So it's a day of both terror and hope.
It is.
Judgment and restoration.
Yeah.
It really makes you think about how you're living your life now, doesn't it?
It does.
You know, are you aligning yourself with God's purposes?
Right.
Or are you contributing to the very things that will be judged on that day?
Definitely thought-provoking.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to remember that Isaiah isn't trying to scare us into submission. He's urging us to live these lives of integrity and compassion, to pursue justice and righteousness, and to place our hope in God's ultimate victory over evil.
It's about choosing to be on the right side of history, the side
Yes.
of love and justice,
Absolutely.
the side that God is ultimately fighting for.
Exactly. And this message of hope is especially prominent in these later chapters of Isaiah.
Yeah.
We see these beautiful visions of a restored Jerusalem.
Yes.
A city filled with joy, peace, and the presence of God.
Yes. Chapters like 40, 52, and 60 are full of these glorious descriptions
Right.
of a future Jerusalem
Yeah.
that has been redeemed and transformed.
Yeah.
It's like Isaiah is painting this picture of a world made new,
He is.
a world where suffering and sorrow are replaced with joy and celebration.
He speaks of a city where mourning is turned into joy, where deserts bloom with flowers,
Right.
and where God's presence dwells in the midst of his people. It's a powerful reminder that even in the face of exile and despair, God's promises remain.
Yeah.
He will restore what has been broken and make all things new.
It's a message of hope that transcends our current circumstances.
It does.
And points us towards a future filled with beauty, peace, and restoration.
Absolutely. And it's not just about passively waiting for that future to arrive. These chapters of Isaiah also contain calls to action.
That's right. It's not a spectator sport.
No, it's not.
We're called to be active participants in God's plan of redemption.
We are.
For example, in chapter 58,
Right.
Isaiah emphasizes the importance of living out our faith in practical ways through acts of justice and mercy.
Yes.
He challenges us to loose the bands of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, and to let the oppressed go free.
He does. He reminds us that true faith isn't just about inward piety or religious rituals. It's about embodying God's love and compassion in the world through our actions and our interactions with others.
It's about being the hands and feet of Jesus.
Yes.
Reaching out to those who are marginalized,
Yeah.
speaking up for those who are voiceless, and working to create a more just and equitable world.
Exactly. He goes on to describe the blessings that flow from this kind of active faith.
Yeah.
He says, "Our light shall break forth as the morning. Our health shall spring forth speedily, and our righteousness shall go before thee." It's a beautiful picture of the transformative power of living out our faith in those tangible ways.
It's not about earning God's favor. It's about becoming more like Him.
Yes.
Reflecting His character in the world.
Exactly. And ultimately, it's about participating in His plan of redemption and restoration, both for ourselves and for the world around us.
As we come to the end of our deep dive into Isaiah, it's important to remember this book is full of these complexities and nuances that we've only just begun to explore.
We have.
It's a book that rewards repeated readings and deep contemplation. Every time you go back to it, you're going to find new insight.
You will.
And challenges that enrich your understanding of God, yourself, and the world around you.
I totally agree. What has stood out to you the most from our time in Isaiah?
You know, for me, it's been the constant reminder that God's heart is always towards restoration.
Yes.
Even in the midst of judgment and destruction.
Yeah.
He's a God who fiercely opposes injustice and wickedness.
Right.
But He's also a God of immense mercy and compassion.
He is.
Always offering a path back to Himself.
Yes.
And that truth offers hope, not just for a future eternity, but for the here and now.
It's a beautiful and encouraging message
Yes.
that speaks to the deepest longings of the human heart.
Right. A longing for wholeness, healing, for a world made right.
Yes.
And as we conclude our deep dive into Isaiah, I want to thank you for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you've been inspired, challenged, and encouraged
I hope so.
by the timeless message of this incredible book.
It's been a pleasure exploring Isaiah with you and with our listener.
Absolutely.
We encourage you to continue reflecting on its words, to let them shape your understanding of God's heart, and to inspire you to live a life of faith, hope, and love in a world that desperately needs it.
Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.